Hey everyone, John here! And recently, I have been rediscovering my love for light gun games, which means I've been playing across multiple different platforms and I've accumulated many different light guns. Bear with me a second, let me show you. And I've had a great time doing this. Many of these light gun games have ballooned to being some of my favorite games of all time. And whenever I go to retro arcades like barcades, usually the most popular cabinets are not like Street Fighter and Donkey Kong, but instead Point Blank and Time Crisis and House of the Dead. So clearly I am not alone in my love for light gun games. So I decided to Google the top 100 games of all time and see how many outlets listed a light gun game. So I checked out 5 of them, and there's no need to drag this out. 0 of them had a light gun game featured. Even Polygon, they went for 500 games, not 500 games. Not a single light gun game. No House of the Dead, no Duck Hunt, no Time Crisis, just zilch. Which I don't think is true. I think a lot of these games are genuinely some of the best ever crafted, but perhaps their accessibility is what stops them from being so fondly remembered. Because of course you need the original peripheral, you need a CRT to play these games, and while there are modern guns out there allowing you to play on modern displays, that's genuinely not what we're talking about today, and is also a bit out of grasp of your general consumer. And so I wanted to go back and play a ton of different light gun games and just tell you how good they are. Try and share the love, and maybe some of you will be able to drag out your old CRTs, one of your guns, one of these games, and just have a great time with a genre that is fully deserving of having a game that deserves a place in the top 100 of all time.
This video is sponsored by Factor 75. Are you stressing about eating delicious, ready-to-eat fresh meals that are never frozen and crafted by chefs while being dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes? Stop that. Factor 75 takes all the stress out of meal planning this hot, scorching summer. Don't even think about shopping in that sun, assuming you're in a hot country where the sun is hot. Sit back, have everything come to you, and live it up with 35 different options per week, including keto, calorie smart, vegan, veggie, and even more. Factor eliminates the hassle of prepping, cooking, and cleaning up. Simply heat up your food and dig in. Get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders using my link. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code with your phone. Once again, thank you to Factor 75 for sponsoring this video. While not the first light gun ever made, the NES Zapper is probably the one that popularized them all. This was even bundled with some consoles containing Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt on the exact same cartridge. One game that redefined what gaming could even be, and Super Mario Bros. All in one. Zapper games are definitely quite primitive compared to what we're going to see a bit later on, but these games are still a lot of fun, especially Duck Hunt with 2 ducks on screen. The way light guns basically work is they follow the scan lines of your TV to get a perfect sync with what's going on. That's why this won't work on modern displays. In Zapper games, when you pull the trigger, a little white box appears on the screen for a moment, and that's what the light gun is looking for. It's detecting the light of the white. So when you shoot a duck, it temporarily turns into a white box, the Zapper looks for that, and if it detects the white, you get a hit. By the way, this is 50 Hz Duck Hunt as well. Feels a bit slow, huh? I don't know if it's just because it's 50 Hz, but I find the core mode a bit too slow. But when playing with 2 ducks, it can become far more chaotic. You get 3 shots per round, so you're allowed to miss 1 of them, but if you miss more than that, then 1 duck is gonna get away, and you will be taunted by the doggo. It's an extremely iconic game, and it's very easy to see why. Even in this day and age, this technology is incredible. Just the tangible feeling of the gun connecting to your TV near perfectly is still impressive in 2024. There may not be a whole lot of variety to Duck Hunt itself, but the novelty has not worn off on me all these years later. And there's also Game C, where you shoot clay pigeons. This one's a lot harder than the ducks because of course they are far smaller. While Duck Hunt was the NES's most famous light gun game, Nintendo did make more, and so I want to explore Hogan's Alley and Wild Gunman, but on the Wii U. Yeah, the Wii U Virtual Console got Zapper games. Not the Wii Virtual Console, not the Switch, just the Wii U. This uses the Wii Remote, which is something we're going to explore a bit later on, and something that I love about this is if you have the audio on the Wii Remote, the volume, you're going to hear a very familiar, creaky zapper trigger sound. Love that. Now, I'm not in love with the NES emulator on the Wii U, it's very dark and dingy, but it allows these games to live on something that isn't a CRT, and I wish that they would do more of this on the Switch. Though of course the Wii Remote is far more precise than a Joy-Con with no sensor bar at all. So, Wild Gunman. This one is a classic cowboy face-off. You've got to wait for the draw, and then shoot them before they shoot you. Their timing is not very good though, so don't worry too much, just make sure you aim at them. Much like Duck Hunt, I much prefer the Game B mode, where there's 2 of them. Just makes it a bit more challenging and more of a game itself, because you generally win every time if you don't do this. And there's also a Game C, where the cowboys come out of windows, and you've got to shoot them all as fast as you can before they shoot you. Again, I prefer this mode. The core mode of Wild Gunman is a bit too simple, a bit too limited, whereas this one has a lot more diversity going on. And Hogan's Alley is a fire range. 3 targets appear at a time, there's usually a civilian, a police officer, and a gangster, and you've got to shoot the gangster. Very, very simple. And quite a slow game. Resetting all of these targets each time takes a while. And I think, just like the other ones, I prefer the alternative mode, where you sort of just have to shoot them out as the screen scrolls. It's far more enjoyable and more tangible and fun. NES Zapper games are still very enjoyable to this day, but the majority of them don't really have the meat to have you playing for hours and hours and hours. These are more something you check out for a few minutes, think they're really cool, put them away, and then when a friend comes over you show them again.
This one here is one of the Mega Drive's light guns, the Konami Justifier. Not a first-party light gun, but it's something that works for games like Lethal Enforcers and Snatcher. So let's check this thing out.
We're playing the Sega CD version of Lethal Enforcers here, and this is such a massive step up over the Zapper. Lethal Enforcers is such a great arcade game. You're playing as a cop, and you've got to shoot up a bunch of different gangsters. They're not just cardboard cutout targets, these are actual people, and so they can shoot you back if you don't shoot them in time. And it really is a huge evolution of what the NES was doing. Most of the time the screen will scroll, so not only are you trying to shoot them, but you've also got to move with the screen, and sometimes they're in the distance, making it harder to shoot, and you've got to go back and forth all over the screen. It is so much fun. And there's also some really great boss battles in there too. Like, just the sheer variety is mountains over any of the NES Zapper games. Lethal Enforcers is so damn good. And another game that used the Konami Justifier was Snatcher. Now, regardless of whether you play with a light gun or not, Snatcher is something that every Hideo Kojima fan should play. This is one of the best stories he's ever told. And I think this game is a lot more fun with the Justifier. Now, this game is still primarily played with a controller. It's an adventure game, a text-based adventure, so most of the game is about exploring and talking to people and getting information. But whenever a Snatcher appears and you face off against them, with a controller, you kind of have to just sort of move a little box around and try and get the Snatcher in your view and shoot them like that. It's a little bit fiddly. Whereas with a light gun, all you do is point and shoot, and it is incredibly fast and accurate and far more fun than anything a controller can do with Snatcher. If you've played Snatcher via an emulator, I think you've probably missed out on just the fun of the combat of this game, although I guess you could use a PC light gun. Police Knots would do this too on the Sega Saturn, another Hideo Kojima game, and that's not something we're looking at today, but maybe in the future we'll give both Snatcher and Police Knots a much more thorough look, because I love both of these games.
Nintendo got very weird with the Super Nintendo's light gun. This is the Super Scope, a wireless light gun. It takes 6 AA batteries and it drains through them like nothing else. And you don't just aim like this, you gotta look through the little visor here and fire like that. Actually, the fire button's up here, it's not where you think it would be, it's up over here. And it had games like Yoshi Safari, a Mario light gun game.
The Super Scope is the only wireless light gun we're looking at today, and that was very impressive when the Super Nintendo came out, just a wireless controller in general. Although working through 6 AA batteries that drain very fast is definitely a big downside to it being wireless. I've not really had a problem with any of the wires in the other light guns. This kind of feels like it's fixing a problem that didn't really need to be fixed. But regardless, the Super Scope is something you can't miss. I mean, it's huge, it's bulking. And instead of just firing down through the iron sights, you've got to actually look through that visor and line up your targets. And the only game I want to really focus on today is Yoshi's Safari. And yeah, this is a Mario shooter game. Mario's riding on the back of Yoshi with a Super Scope of his own, and he's just shooting Goombas and Koopas and the Koopalings. Like, you're actually just blasting them away. It's crazy for a Mario game. But Yoshi's Safari is pretty well made. It looks really good for the Super Nintendo, a nice scrolling, sort of 3D-ish looking effect. And it's generally pretty precise, although I did find sometimes when I tried pulling the trigger, it wouldn't always respond. It's one of those sort of turbo games you can just kind of hold it down, but sometimes it wouldn't quite work. Not sure if that's my controller or what, but when it works, and Yoshi Safari is a radically fun game. I really like the presence of this light gun. This is the Sega Saturn's one, primarily for Virtua Cop, but also House of the Dead, and while it doesn't do anything outrageously new, one thing it can do, which is something I hadn't seen before this in any other era, is you could use it like a Wii Remote cursor when putting your name in. And I'm not entirely sure how it did that, because previous light guns were like looking for, like white boxes, but this one you can just move around the screen without even pulling the trigger and making it flash. It's magic. The Saturn got 2 games in this series, Virtua Cop 1 and Virtua Cop 2, and we're focusing on the sequel today. And these are really interesting games. Unlike anything we've seen previously, of course, these are polygonal 3D, which is a pretty radical shift for the light gun genre. But also, it moves around a lot. So you get these rather static screens, but whenever an enemy appears, you zoom in on them, and they have a little target, and if their target reaches red, they will shoot you. So you've got to be very reactive and shoot them before they even consider shooting you. And you can try and shoot them before that target appears, which is difficult because they're so far away. But you've really got to be very, very fast in taking down these enemies. And of course, you've got to reload by shooting off the screen, so finding the time to take your aim off them to do that is very strategic and tactical. Although I will say, sometimes it can get a little bit BS-y, where enemies will appear just off the overscan of a CRT screen, so sometimes getting them in your sight before they even appear on the screen can be quite tricky, and you've got to know exactly where they spawn. So replaying this game is definitely essential to mastering it. I don't think you're going to get very far on your first time, but once you start to really learn Virtua Cop 2, I think this is one of the best rail shooters ever made. It's bright, it's colourful, the music is rocking, and there's alternate paths. It's just so fun to replay again and again and again. And then came the original House of the Dead. Now, the Saturn port isn't perfect. It definitely runs a lot worse than the arcade version, and sometimes it just stops to load. But with that said, it is still House of the Dead 1, and I think this is the best console version we've had of this game. There is a modern remake on Switch, PS5, and Xbox, but playing this game without a light gun is just not the way it's meant to be played. It is so much more fun with an actual gun. This series definitely got better with its sequel, but still, the first game is so much fun, and you've always got to be ready to empty your entire clip, reload, shoot again. It's relentless with how many zombies there are. Even with that relentless nature, it remains paced rather well. And I just love the chunky 32-bit graphics. Like, to me, this is graphics. Nothing has surpassed this ever. Now we're cooking. This is the GunCon 1 for the Sony PlayStation. And not only is there a lot of presence and heft, but one of the coolest things about this is it can take composite signal from your PlayStation to better sync the gun to your display. So this is one of the most accurate light guns of the era, and it was so cool for games like Point Blank and Time Crisis. And using this button here, in Time Crisis, you can use it to duck in and out of cover, like the pedal in the arcade machine. So let's check this thing out. This is Time Crisis, one of the best light gun series of all time. And while I think the series got a bit better with its sequels, Time Crisis 1 is still really, really fun. But to replicate the pedal, you either use something else in controller port 2, or you, I guess more ideally, use the red button on the controller. And it works really well. In fact, Time Crisis 1 is probably one of the most difficult games in the entire series. There's definitely a lot of points where I was quite narrow with that timer, because you earn more time after doing each sequence, so the faster you clear them, the more time you'll get. But in terms of audio, action, pacing, Time Crisis is the best light gun game we have seen so far, and it only gets better. And you know what might be even better than Time Crisis 1? Is Point Blank. There's Point Blank 1 and Point Blank 2. We're looking at Point Blank 1 today. And I think the best way to describe this to someone who didn't grow up with Point Blank is think of WarioWare, but as a rail shooter. So you get these really quick mini games that can be anything. Like so far, these have all been about shooting a gun at a target, right? But that's not necessarily what all these games are. Like some of them maybe, but other ones can just be anything. It really does take the light gun genre and turn it on its head to being just fun, fast-paced mini-games. And Point Blank, again, whenever I go to like a barcade, Point Blank is usually something that is always being hogged by someone. It's one of the most popular arcade machines out there, for good reason. Point Blank is absolutely awesome. And Namco were on their A-game on the PlayStation with these light gun games.
Now, this one didn't actually release in America, but this is the first-party Sega Dreamcast light gun for games like House of the Dead 2. You can put your VMU in here, there's a D-pad and a few buttons to navigate menus. It's generally just a really nice light gun. Doesn't have the composite sync that the GunCon 1 had, but it's still very accurate, and just a nice comfortable one. I just love the utility of actual buttons on the controller, which is something we'll see again in the GunCon 2 in just a moment.
Now, the Sega Dreamcast wasn't rolling in light gun games, so let's focus on House of the Dead 2, one of the best ever made to this very day. House of the Dead 2 takes everything that made House of the Dead 1 great, but just brings it even higher, and has such a cheesy nature, whether it is the writing, the music, or the voice acting, of course. It's still very hard like the first game, but I think it gives you a lot more breathing room, and is generally just paced far better. Like, I can play this game again and again and again, and just memorizing it makes you feel like you've mastered it, makes you feel better at the game, but it never feels too fast or too slow, even though you still pretty much have to empty your entire clip and reload as fast as you can every single time there's a zombie encounter, but it feels fun doing that. You never feel exhausted like the first game can sometimes make you feel. And to this very day, I would put House of the Dead 2 on a ranking of some of my favorite games of all time. It's so much fun.
And here is the GunCon 2, one of the best light guns ever made. Much smaller than the GunCon 1, much more compact, but it packs far more utility. A D-pad, much like the Sega Dreamcast 1, but there's also buttons on the side, there's a button on the bottom. It's great for games like Time Crisis 2 and 3 for ducking in and out of cover. I like using the D-pad for that, but you can use pretty much any button on this controller. It's super precise, still has composite sync, although of course you can use other outputs like SCART, and generally this is just such a good gun. And it allowed for games that go for more complicated inputs than just pointing at the TV, like Resident Evil Survivor 2, which is a full free-roaming game where you can move with the D-pad but still aim at the TV. Very cool for stuff like that. Anyway, let's take a look at these games.
And speaking of my favorite light gun games of all time, Time Crisis 2 and 3. These take everything that made the first game great, but just refine them to a shimmering gleam. And what's great about the PS2 version of Time Crisis 2 is it came out quite a bit after the arcade version, and so gets quite a few enhancements. Like the graphics are far better than the arcade, and there's also a lot more interactivity, like you can shoot a pan that's hanging out, and that pan can whack into an enemy and kill them. I think that stuff's great, and it's stuff that you couldn't do in the arcade. The sheer variety and quantity of set pieces squeezed into Time Crisis 2 and 3 is miraculous. And while they're not very long, like you can beat these in like 30 minutes, they give you more of a feeling of adventure than most games can in a 100-hour time span. And they're so replayable too. I love playing these games with a friend. If I see a Time Crisis arcade machine and I'm out with someone, of course I'm jumping on it. If a friend's around, of course I'm forcing them to play Time Crisis with me. If there's a stranger in the street, of course I'm inviting them in to play Time Crisis. 2 and 3 are peak of the entire light gun genre, and any top 100 list that lacks them is uncultured. You hear me? GQ magazine? Uncultured! And speaking of uncultured, here's Resident Evil Survivor 2. This game isn't that bad. It's a European exclusive Resident Evil game based off Code Veronica. So you roam around all these Code Veronica areas in first person using the D-pad. However, you can still aim at the screen with your light gun and get full accuracy. It's very arcadey. You've just got to go to a point where you find a key and take that key to the exit. And sometimes Nemesis appears from 3, even though he wasn't in Code Veronica. It's a weird game, but this game with a controller, it feels very clunky. And if you play with a light gun, I think you're going to get a lot more enjoyment. I think a lot of this game's negative reception probably comes from those who played with a controller. But if you're playing with the GunCon 2, it doesn't make it the best game of all time or anything, but it's an interesting one. And it's great seeing a light gun game that isn't just on rails. And while those are all the light guns I want to talk about, the genre did not end there. The Wii Remote gave the rail shooter a brand new life. Lots of great rail shooter ports, a lot of brand new games, some of the best in the entire genre. And while yes, this is not a light gun, this is an IR receiver, it still allows you to basically duplicate what a light gun could do. Of course, you're not synced to your TV, you're synced to the sensor bars. It's not like you can just point and get 100% accuracy. But this was better than nothing. And I love that so many utilities of a light gun just found their way into general games, into platformers, into puzzle games. That's why the Wii Remote input is one of my favorites of all time. This did it too. Not quite as well, but we got some cool games out of it. With CRTs basically gone and the inferior LCDs rising up, light gun games basically couldn't be played anymore, and the genre, more or less, died. Although, the Wii was there to rise them back up. Now, there are some games like House of the Dead 2 and 3, and Ghost Squad, and the Virtual Console games like Duck Hunt that allow you to turn the cursor off. But I wouldn't really recommend playing like that, because of course with the Wii Remote, you're not really synced to the TV, you're synced to the sensor bar. And so without that cursor, it's very hard to hit anything. Maybe you can set up the sensor bar in a near perfect way, but generally, I think these games are a lot more fun with the cursor on, which does take a little bit away from the light gun experience, but at least these games are allowed to exist. And yes, we've got ports like House of the Dead 2 and 3. And Sega got a little bit weird with this release. They claimed it would run in widescreen, and if you boot the game up, I can tell you now that this is, it looks, technically it's widescreen, but it's 4:3 just stretched out. So if you want to play this game, make sure your Wii settings are set to 4:3. And this is something that Ghost Squad does too. I don't know why Sega did this. They're both Sega games. But these are basically perfect versions. And interestingly, Xbox also had House of the Dead 3 on that console. That's the only actual, just standalone version of that game on console. And it also contained House of the Dead 2 as an unlockable. So that they just kind of took that Xbox game and rebranded it for the Wii. But House of the Dead 3 is also a very good game. Not quite as good as 2, but it's a pretty good game. And if you can't get a Dreamcast with the light gun, this is still a very good way to experience House of the Dead 2 and 3. And Ghost Squad is severely underrated. You can get this game for next to nothing, and you go through these levels with tons of alternate routes and ways to play. You can go kind of stealthy, you can go full guns blazing. It is incredibly fun. If you own a Wii and haven't played Ghost Squad, you really should get on that. This is the only actual port of the game to console. It is possible to play on Xbox, but you've got to hack your system to make that work. So Ghost Squad is definitely easiest played on Wii. And developers definitely didn't go as far as they could have porting light gun games. Stuff like Virtua Cop 2 and 1 would have been perfect for the Wii. And so would Time Crisis 1, 2, and 3. Just holding the A button to duck in and out of cover while using the B button to shoot. That would have been great. But we didn't really get that many light gun ports, unfortunately. But we did get stuff like Gunblade New York and LA Machine Guns. This is something that was off my radar until recently. But what cool games. In both of these, you basically fly around. In one of them, you're like a mech, and in the other one, you're on a helicopter. And the action is so high octane. You're just shooting relentlessly. And what's also quite funny is, despite these being older arcade games, they squeezed in a Sonic and the Black Knight advertisement over here. But these are unlike anything else I've really explored in the genre, just taking you around very rapidly. And while I don't really consider them the best of the best, I'm still very happy I played them, and they're something that if you own a Wii, you really should pick up. Now, while the Wii did have some legacy light gun games, of course, it had some brand new ones too. And one pretty great one is House of the Dead Overkill. I say pretty great. I don't really consider this to be as good as the original trilogy. It's fine. The tone is a bit more self-aware, so they go for more of like a B-movie vibe. But the pacing of House of the Dead Overkill is non-stop. There are constantly zombies everywhere. And the game doesn't really particularly run that well. Sometimes it will stop. You can hear the disc whirling when it comes to loading more zombies, and the game kind of stutters whenever that happens. It can still be really fun. I think there's still some great set pieces, but it's not quite the caliber that I kind of expect from House of the Dead. But in terms of really, really great stuff, Dead Space Extraction. Do not sleep on this. Don't just see this as some lesser Dead Space spin-off. This is like one of my favorite light gun games. It looks absolutely incredible for the Wii. Some great lighting effects, some great models, a really good story even for a rail shooter. But the way that it incorporates Dead Space mechanics into the rail shooter genre is remarkable. Like, you really do have to aim for limbs, take off body parts, and use all these just great weapons. And you can get like a gravity gun from Half-Life. You can just pick up anything and shoot at whatever monster you see. It is scary, it is fun, it's up there with some of the best in the entire genre. Resident Evil, The Umbrella Chronicles, and Darkside Chronicles are really cool games. It's basically Resident Evil's take on House of the Dead. But I think the best part of these games is like an abridged version of a bunch of classic Resident Evil games. So if you got into the series with 4 and 5, and you don't really jive with the tank controls, you can still get caught up on the story. Like, both of these games combined retell the events of 0, 1, 2, 3, Code Veronica. Umbrella Chronicles gives you some more of Wesker's story, like how he's revived, what he's doing behind the scenes. And in Darkside Chronicles, you go on a mission with Leon and Krauser before Resident Evil 4, so you get to see a bit more of their relationship and get an original story told there. So if you're a Resident Evil fan, these games are great, but in terms of their rail shooter quality, I think Umbrella Chronicles is pretty good, a bit slow at times. Darkside Chronicles, for the most part, better, if it weren't for the shaky Handycam camera. It just makes it hard to hit anything. If it weren't for that camera, I think everything about Darkside Chronicles would be better. Like the story, the presentation, that stuff is all better. The general gameplay is better, the pacing's better, but that shaky camera is just kind of a bit too much for me. And what I consider the Wii's Duck Hunt is Link's crossbow training, and this is a way better game than Duck Hunt. I guess I kind of consider it Duck Hunt because this level here is basically the clay pigeon shooting game. But Link's crossbow training is perhaps the best reuse of assets I've ever seen in a game. Like, it can just take entire levels and areas from Twilight Princess and recontextualize them as a rail shooter. And sometimes it's just stuff like hitting targets, but sometimes it gets a bit more action-focused and allows you to, like, free roam with the nunchuck and hit, like, skeletons or hit frost creatures, and it's just so cool re-exploring Twilight Princess areas as a full-on shooter, whether it is on rails or free roaming. And this was bundled with the Wii Zapper, and most Wii rail shooter games will say that they're Zapper compatible, which means nothing. The Wii Zapper is just a plastic holding for your Wii remote, and it gives you a nice little trigger for the B button, but it doesn't change a thing. Any game can be played without the Zapper, but it's still a pretty nice controller, just very similar to the Wii Wheel. Unironically, Link's crossbow training is one of my favorites in the entire genre. It feels so good getting a high combo, and you really have to be careful, because if you lose that combo, you lose your multiplier. And so suddenly you're getting like times 30 per shot, and now you're getting times 0, so you basically, you may as well restart if you want a high score. So you really got to memorize the levels, you got to hit the targets in the middle to get a better score. There's so much replayability despite this being a very short game. Very, very cool. And we cannot talk about Wii rail shooters without talking about one of the best games on the entire system, perhaps even the best game on the entire system. Sin and Punishment Successor of the Skies, or Sky Successor, depending on where you live in the world. Now, this wouldn't have been a light gun game, of course, because the first Sin and Punishment wasn't, and there's a bit more involvement with the nunchuck, being able to move around and dodge. So it's more in-depth than your usual light gun game, but Sin and Punishment is out of this world. If you like Kid Icarus Uprising's flight sections, This is an entire game of that. If you're someone who says, like, I wish Kid Icarus Uprising was nothing but flight sections, like, here is your game, this is what you're asking for. It is exactly like that. If an enemy gets close to you, you can just hit them with a melee attack, just like Kid Icarus. Like, so much of Uprising's core comes from Sin and Punishment 2. And it is just married with perfect pacing, crazy areas, and just play it. I shouldn't have to talk about. Like, look at it. I shouldn't have to tell you how good it. You can see how good it is. Play it. If you have a Wii and you don't have Sin and Punishment 2, I'm afraid that you have let yourself down. Fix that. Now, while the Wii was definitely the savior of the rail shooter in this era, the PlayStation 3 tried as well with PlayStation Move, and it's generally pretty good. The camera that receives the PS Move controller is a little bit more fiddly to place than a sensor bar, and generally I don't think it's quite as precise either. My movements feel a bit slower and a bit less in sync than a Wii Remote would. But it allowed for modern arcade ports that wouldn't run on the Wii, like House of the Dead 4. And House of the Dead 4 is very busy. There's a lot of enemies everywhere. Your pistol's been replaced by an actual machine gun this time, which is very different for House of the Dead. I think it's a bit much. I think there's a few too many enemies. They appear a bit too often. It's an exhausting game to play. It's still very fun, and I definitely recommend buying it before the PlayStation 3 store threatens to shut down again, because this is a digital-only PSN game that was never ported anywhere else. But yeah, I don't think this is quite the same caliber as the original trilogy, much like House of the Dead Overkill. But I would put this one a bit ahead of Overkill. It's a fun game, but not a redefining one. Time Crisis 4 also found its way onto PlayStation 3, and this originally came with the GunCon 3. And because, of course, it can't sync to a CRT, the GunCon 3 has its own sensors that you place around the TV. So there's a lot of setup in getting this to work, and the GunCon 3 is very expensive now. And it's a very complicated controller as well. Like, while the GunCon 2 added a D-pad, the GunCon 3 basically adds a DualShock 3 that's just kind of taped on to the GunCon. And I think this game got a bit too complex, but it's okay. And PlayStation 3 also got some HD versions of Wii shooters, so games like Resident Evil The Umbrella Chronicles and Darkside Chronicles, and the absolutely outstanding Dead Space Extraction are on PlayStation 3 in HD. They don't really change the visuals much at all, like they're still quite low poly because they're made for the Wii, but it's nice seeing them in a cleaner resolution. I think I'd still recommend playing these on the Wii just for the more precise control scheme, but PS Move holds its own if you don't have a Wii, and I think everyone should try Dead Space Extraction. So if you have no Wii, but you've got a PlayStation 3 and a Move, you should definitely play this game.
Now, I fully appreciate that some people watching this video, and this is probably quite threatening just waving a gun around, but I fully appreciate that some of you are probably too young to have owned a CRT and to have owned a light gun. But if you ever get the chance to go to a retro arcade, please do. Please play games like Time Crisis and House of the Dead, because I think they are really going to give you a new appreciation for what video games can be. There is something so tangible about having a controller that just syncs so perfectly to the game, just pointing and shooting and getting a near perfect accuracy. It's so good, and the pacing of some of these games really are some of the best in the entire industry. So in my opinion, games like Time Crisis 2, Point Blank, House of the Dead, they are fully deserving of being on these lists of top 100 games of all time. They are better than so many others that are ranked here, and they really shouldn't just be put down because they are light gun games. That's a great thing to be. I wish I was a light gun game. Anyway, thank you for watching all the way through until the end, and because you're still here, it is hot take time. And my hot take today, not even a hot one, it's kind of a medium one. I think the virtual reality world has been not utilized to its best utility. And by that, I mean, where the heck are all these light gun games at? We have some, like the Until Dawn game. That was a pretty good rail shooter. But it's unbelievable that games like Time Crisis haven't re-emerged in virtual reality. Like that, with like the GunCon 2 even. Let me get a second. With this. Like, yes, using the D-pad is good, but it's not like a perfect replacement for the pedal, right? The pedal had this great feedback with the arcade machine. And Time Crisis in VR, you could just duck. You can just, like, hide behind cover and go back out and start shooting. It makes so much damn sense. And yeah, I know virtual reality isn't something that everyone owns. It's not the most accessible thing. It's not the best thing to put in an arcade. But it boggles the mind that not many developers have even attempted light gun games in VR. It just feels like the perfect match. If Time Crisis 6 were to ever show itself, I hope it would be via VR. It just feels like the perfect way to bring Time Crisis back. And yeah, I am befuddled as to why it's not happened. Anyway, thank you for sticking with me. Love you all. And I hope that you all have your light gun appreciation in the comments. See you later. Bye-bye.